Ned Stark guided his horse beneath the towering gates of the Red Keep, Jon Snow, his nephew, though the realm did not know it, riding at his side. A host of onlookers gathered in the courtyard, craning necks to see the arriving northern party. Rumors always spread fast in King's Landing, and many had whispered of something unusual spurring the king's summons. The king had come north in a small retinue, then left with Lord Stark and the boy who bore his name. Something was amiss, or so court gossips claimed, and the more cunning among them guessed that Ned's bastard might stand at the heart of the mystery. Stepping down from his horse, Ned cast an assessing glance around him. King Robert stood by the great doors, flanked by Ser Barristan Selmy of the Kingsguard. At the king's other side, Queen Cersei Lannister lingered, her pale green eyes alight with curiosity and disdain in equal measure. A swirl of courtiers, servants, and guards parted as Ned and Jon approached. "Ah, there he is," boomed Robert. His tone feigned cheer, but Ned detected the underlying wariness in his old friend's voice. "The hand of the king returns to the nest." Ned bowed stiffly, mindful that they were on display. "Your Grace," he said, and then turned to acknowledge the queen. Cersei inclined her head, her lips curling in a thin, formal smile. Jon did as Ned had instructed. He stepped forward, placed a hand over his heart, and bowed respectfully to both monarchs. Ned sensed the tension in his nephew's rigid posture, though Jon's face remained calm. Robert glanced at Jon, a flicker of recognition passing in his heavy-lidded eyes. "Boy, you're taller than when I saw you last. The North must feed its wolves well." He forced a grin that did not reach his eyes. "Your Grace," Jon replied politely. Cersei's gaze darted from Jon to Ned and back again, as though seeking a clue. At length, she stepped forward, a graceful swish of her green and gold gown. Her voice was civil, honey poured over ice. "Welcome to the Red Keep, Lord Stark. And welcome to you, Jon Snow. Do you find the city much changed from your arrival? I recall you visited once as a child, though perhaps you were too young to remember." Jon shook his head. "I was very young, Your Grace. All of this is new to me." She peered at him with cool interest. "Indeed, I imagine it must be overwhelming. King's Landing has a way of devouring the naive." Before Jon could reply, Robert waved for them to enter the keep. "Come, Ned. We have much to discuss. The council waits on us." His gaze flickered toward Jon. "You, lad, best see to your things and settle into your new quarters. The servants will guide you." Jon looked to Ned, uncertain if he should follow. Ned gave him a small nod. A steward stepped forward, motioning for Jon to accompany him. So Jon departed, leaving Ned and the king to vanish into the corridors of power. The castle's labyrinthine passages surrounded Jon in shifting shadows of red stone and flickering torches. He followed the steward wordlessly, absorbing the unfamiliar atmosphere. The drone of footfalls on the polished floors, the hush of watching guards in golden cloaks, the faint whiff of sour wine wafting from unseen chambers. So far from the crisp air of Winterfell and the simple directness of the North, Jon felt like a cornered animal in an alien environment. He arrived at a modest suite of rooms near the Hand's private apartments. The walls were hung with threadbare tapestries, but the furniture looked sturdy and well-maintained. A pair of narrow windows overlooked the city below. The steward bowed stiffly, asked if Jon required anything, and departed. Alone, Jon set his sword belt aside and took a moment to collect himself. The magnitude of his presence here weighed on him like mail he had never worn before. He reminded himself, no matter what else happened, he must guard the secret of his parentage. His life and Ned's depended on it. Moments later, a sharp rap on the door startled him. He swung it open to reveal a slight figure with curious eyes and a wry smile. Arya Stark. She had arrived a day earlier by ship, as Ned had finally relented and allowed her to come south with a small party of guards, though he had forbade Bran or Rickon from following. Behind her stood one of the Stark guards. "Arya," Jon said, surprised. "When did you—" She threw her arms around him, ignoring the guard's discreet cough. "I came by sea," she said, releasing him. Father told me not to roam the city without an escort, and he's locked me up with Septas half the day. Sansa's in the north with grandmother Tully, so I'm stuck here with no one to talk to except sycophants." Her brown eyes shone with mischief. "But now you're here." Jon's heart lifted at the sight of her. "You should be careful, Arya. This place isn't like Winterfell. Father wants you to stay safe." She rolled her eyes. I know. I'm just glad you're here. Maybe we can train together in the courtyard. I brought Needle." She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Or we can slip out and see the city. I've heard the Street of Steel is a wonder, swordsmiths everywhere." Jon's lips twitched in a ghost of a grin. "Perhaps in time, but first we need to keep our wits about us. We're playing a dangerous game here, Arya." She shrugged. "The only danger I see is dying of boredom. But you always were too serious. Come on, let's see if we can't find you something to eat. You look half-starved." They stepped into the corridor, the Stark guard trailing behind them at a discreet distance. Arya chattered about the sights she'd glimpsed from the castle ramparts. The sprawling city rooftops, the ships in Blackwater Bay, the swirl of exotic people from the far corners of the realm. Jon listened, though his mind strayed to the possibility that even the walls had ears. They passed windows that overlooked the gardens, catching glimpses of courtiers meandering among hedges and fountains. Jon recognized no one. It unnerved him. In Winterfell, he knew every face. Here, everyone was a stranger, and every stranger might be an enemy. At last, they reached a lesser-used courtyard where a cluster of wooden practice dummies stood. Young squires sparred under the watchful eye of a drilling master-at-arms. One of the squires, a pale youth with straw-colored hair, gave Arya a sneer. "Look, it's the wolf girl." Arya bristled, hand drifting to Needle's hilt. But Jon placed a cautionary hand on her shoulder. The squire looked Jon up and down, unimpressed. "And who's this?" "Another northern savage." Jon met his gaze calmly. "I'm no savage, but you do well to keep a civil tongue." The squire snorted. "Don't presume to teach me manners, bastard." A ripple of tension passed through the group. One or two of the other squires shifted uneasily, aware that an insult to a Stark retainer could have consequences. Jon felt heat flood his cheeks, though he controlled his temper. He'd been called bastard all his life, never had the word carried quite such danger. For if the boy only knew the truth. Arya squared her shoulders. "You'd better mind your own steel, you worm." The squire sneered again, but the master-at-arms barked at him to resume training. Arya rolled her eyes and gestured for Jon to follow her away from the yard. "See what I mean?" she muttered. "I hate this city." Jon sighed. "Perhaps we shouldn't wander too far yet. Father will want to speak with us." Sure enough, that evening, Ned summoned them both to his private rooms. He looked weary, and the furrow in his brow spoke of long hours in council with the king. He seated them in simple chairs near the fireplace. A tray of bread and cheese lay untouched on a table, along with a half-drained cup of wine. Arya perched on the edge of a seat, leaning forward with eager curiosity. Jon stood by the hearth, arms folded. "How went the council?" Jon asked at length. Ned exhaled. "Robert is under pressure from all sides. The coffers are low. The crown is in debt. Lord Tywin's gold props up half the realm, so the Lannisters wield outsized influence. As hand, I'm expected to keep the kingdom running, deal with threats, negotiate with the Iron Bank, all while dodging the Queen's interference." He pinched the bridge of his nose. "And that's not the half of it," Arya asked. "Did the king say why he demanded you bring Jon?" Ned hesitated. "Not in so many words, but it's clear he wants to keep watch. He's uneasy about the truth, about your parentage." He looked at Jon directly. "We must be careful. Above all, we cannot allow rumors to spread. Robert gave his word he'd not harm you so long as you keep your head down. But if others learn you're Rhaegar's son..." Arya inhaled sharply. Even months after first learning Jon's secret, the name of Rhaegar Targaryen hanging over Jon's head still struck her with a mix of awe and foreboding. Jon turned his gaze to the fire. "I understand. I'll keep my distance." Avoid attention. Ned nodded, though he looked troubled. Yes, but the court is full of prying eyes. As the Hand's nephew, bastard or not, you'll be noticed. We'll devise some tasks for you that keep you out of the main swirl of politics. Training, perhaps study with the maesters in the keep's library. If you must attend events, speak little, observe much. Do not trust easily. He turned to Arya. And you, my wild wolf, must promise me you'll behave. The queen has little fondness for me or my children. She'd find any excuse to cause mischief. If you provoke a Lannister or a court favorite, it could come back on us all. Arya frowned but nodded, albeit reluctantly. Yes, father. Satisfied, Ned offered them both a tired smile. Now off to bed. There's a long day ahead, with formal introductions and a small feast tomorrow in honor of our arrival. Jon and Arya rose. They bade Ned good night, stepping out into the corridor. A hush had settled over the Red Keep as the hour grew late, the torches throwing long shadows that danced on the walls. Jon escorted Arya to the chamber she shared with her new septa, then found his own quarters. The events of the day swam through his mind, making rest elusive. Finally, exhaustion forced his eyes shut. Morning arrived with the muffled clamor of a city already awake. Outside Jon's narrow window, the horns of dockworkers echoed from the harbor, and the bustle of peddlers on the streets seeped over the castle walls. He rose, dressed in practical northern garb, simple gray wool, plus a belt and boots. As he left his room, he nearly collided with a figure sweeping down the hall in fine silken robes. Lord Varys, the master of whisperers. A gentle smile curved the spider's lips as he paused, hands folded. "Ah, Jon Snow, is it?" Varys's soft, airy voice carried no malice, only curiosity. "How good of you to join us in the capital." Jon bowed slightly, wariness stirring in his gut. He had heard Ned speak in guarded tones about this man, an enigmatic presence who seemed to know every secret in Westeros. "My lord," he said politely. Varys took in Jon's features with a keen eye. "I was present at the feast King Robert hosted in Winterfell when you were just a child. You've grown into a fine young man." His gaze flicked momentarily to Jon's dark hair, his pale skin, searching for something. Jon felt as though under a magnifying glass. "Thank you, my lord," Jon replied, tense. Varys let out a small sigh. "Such formalities. I dare say you'll find the Red Keep both fascinating and dangerous, depending on where your steps take you. If you have need of guidance, perhaps I can help. After all, I strive to serve the realm, in my humble way." Jon's heart thrummed. He forced a polite smile. "I'll keep that in mind, my lord." With that, Varys continued along, his slippers making scarcely a sound on the stone. Jon watched him vanish around a corner, feeling uneasy. Every instinct told him that if anyone in the city could unravel his secret, it was Varys. The day wore on with dull but necessary routines. Jon joined Arya in the practice yard. They sparred lightly with wooden swords under the watchful eye of a patient arms instructor from the north, Harwin, a man from the Stark stables who trained with them in Winterfell. Across the yard, knights and guards took measure of the newcomers. Some dismissed Arya's efforts as child's play, but a few recognized a spark of skill. Jon found some measure of solace in the rhythmic clash of wood. For a while it felt like home, but soon enough, afternoon shadows stretched across the walls, and the time came for the small feast in the king's solar. Unlike the grand feasts that included the entire court, this was a more intimate affair. Only the royal family, Ned Stark, Jon, Arya, and a handful of high lords. They gathered around a polished table laden with roast meats, honeyed carrots, bread, and jugs of summer wine. Robert drank heavily, as was his wont, while Cersei looked on with regal composure. A smattering of conversation about the realm's financial woes and rumors from across the narrow sea punctuated the meal. Jon kept his head lowered, chiming in only when asked direct questions about the north. Partway through the feast, Prince Tommen and Princess Myrcella arrived, Robert's younger children. They were polite enough, smiling shyly at Arya, who responded with awkward courtesy. Joffrey, the crown prince, entered last, strolling with calculated arrogance. He took a seat near his mother, ignoring Arya entirely and casting Jon a glance of faint superiority. Jon avoided eye contact. After the meal, as servants cleared plates, Robert leaned back, resting a massive hand on Ned's shoulder. "Now, old friend, how stands the north? Still half frozen?" Ned forced a small smile. "It's as it always is, Robert, ours." Robert let out a booming laugh. "Ha! Good. I'll not argue with that. May the seven bless you, Ned. For if half the men of this realm possessed a fraction of your loyalty, we'd be in better shape." His gaze slanted to Jon. "And you, lad, how are you finding the capital so far?" Jon glanced around the table at all the expectant faces. "It's a very large, your grace, and busy. I'm still finding my bearings." He spoke evenly, mindful of the tension in the king's eyes. Robert snorted. It's large enough for a man to lose himself if he isn't careful." "Well, keep your nose clean, and you'll do fine." Cersei tapped her fingers on the table. "Indeed, perhaps the lad can be made useful in some capacity. I recall the king has need of additional squires." Robert frowned. But we have enough Lannister squires running about." He gave Ned a pointed look. "Still, perhaps the boy might do well squiring for someone we trust." Cersei's lips curved. "Oh, I'm certain we can find a knight who would appreciate a strong northern lad at his side." Jon stiffened, feeling as if caught in a game he did not understand. Ned cleared his throat. "Jon is a capable swordsman, but I had intended for him to focus on assisting me with some tasks regarding the northern taxes, the logistics we must file for the crown. He's quite adept with numbers and letters, thanks to Maester Luwin's tutelage." It wasn't entirely false. Ned clearly wished to keep Jon out of the direct orbit of the Lannisters or any unscrupulous knights who might question his parentage. Cersei arched a golden eyebrow. "Is that so? A shame to keep a fighter's spirit buried in ledgers. But if you insist, Lord Stark." Ned offered a curt nod, ending the matter with quiet finality. Robert, half drunk, seemed disinclined to press it, draining another cup of wine instead. But the unease in the room lingered. Later, as courtiers dispersed, Jon noticed a sharp-eyed man lingering by the arches of the Solar, a slight smirk on his lips. This was Peter Baelish, known as Littlefinger. He gave Jon a smooth, mocking bow, then melted away into the crowd. Another threat, Jon thought grimly, remembering Ned's caution about Littlefinger's cunning and capacity for betrayal. Days passed in much the same fashion. Ned spent long hours in the council chamber, wrestling with matters of debt, logistics, and rumors from the east. Some said the Dothraki were stirring, that a Targaryen princess had married their warlord. Robert grew agitated at any mention of Targaryens, as though it reminded him uncomfortably of the secret he now bore. Meanwhile, Cersei grew watchful, dispatching Lannister guards to spy on whomever she pleased. Arya tried to explore the city discreetly, but the presence of her escorts made that difficult. Jon, at Ned's instruction, split his time between practicing in the yard and poring over the library's records, trying to remain inconspicuous. Still, gossip wafted through the halls like a persistent breeze. Servants whispered that the king and queen were at odds more than ever. Some speculated it was over money, others over Robert's frequent dalliances. A few quietly whispered that Ned Stark's presence had driven a wedge deeper between them. More alarming yet were whispers that Varys, Baelish, and other members of the small council sensed something unusual about Lord Stark's bastard. That Snow never sought out brothels or trouble, that he was polite and guarded, that he bore a solemnity beyond his years. So the rumor mill churned, hungry for scandal. One afternoon, on the way back from the library, Jon found himself cornered by a tall man in gilded armor, Jaime Lannister, the Kingslayer himself. With long golden hair, a smirk, and dangerous eyes, Jaime blocked Jon's path in a torchlit corridor. 2 Lannister guards flanked him. Jon froze, hand drifting toward his sword hilt. "Relax, boy," Jaime drawled, voice dripping with a mocking grace. "I only wish to have a look at the Stark bastard I've heard so much about." The one who rides at Lord Stark's side and draws the king's eye. Jon held Jaime's gaze, trying to project calm. I'm no one special. Only here to serve my Lord Father. Jaime laughed softly, a note of contempt in the sound. So you say, yet the king calls for you by name, or so I'm told. And my sister, the queen, has taken an interest too. You must be quite the curiosity. Jon kept his voice even. I'm but a loyal Stark, Sir Jaime. Nothing more. Jaime's eyes flicked over Jon, studying him. A loyal Stark. How admirable. Let us hope that loyalty never strays, for your sake. He paused, then added in a softer tone. You're what, 16? 17. 17, sir. 17, Jaime repeated, shaking his head. You look older. In the eyes, at least. Wariness beyond your years. I've seen such a look in battle-worn men. His smirk faded. Be careful, boy. The red keep devours the unwary. With that, Jaime brushed past, his crimson cloak billowing behind him. Jon stared at the Kingslayer's retreating form, a chill running the length of his spine. There had been a note of genuine caution beneath the mocking exterior, and it left Jon more uneasy than outright hostility might have. He confided this encounter to Ned that evening, who simply grimaced. Jaime Lannister is dangerous, but he's not subtle. He may suspect something is amiss, but I doubt he knows. Keep your head, Jon.